Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video I'm going to be painting something completely different. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some scatter terrain, and we're going to make some scatter terrain out of recycled materials. So for my job I have a lot of these little round plastic CD things, so I'm going to turn them into a little bit of scatter terrain instead of throwing them out. And I'm going to use a lot of these different things. So I'm showing you at the beginning here just all these different kinds of items that I'm using. So basic materials and hot wire cutter, a little bit of polystyrene, all these different things. And pretty much that's all I'm doing here is I've got 2 blocks of polystyrene and I'm trying to sort of stick them together to work out sort of how I'm going to create this sort of leaning rock effect. So that's all I'm doing is I'm just cutting them at an angle at the base so that they'll have an area to stand so that they can kind of lean against each other. Now from there, using the hot wire cutter, as you can see, be careful with this as well, mind. If you haven't used a hot wire cutter before, be careful because you can burn yourself quite easily. It is a fun but also a little bit of a difficult thing to use if you haven't used it before. So that's all I'm doing is just kind of cutting out a random shape. So I'm kind of cutting out a shape of a rock, and that's all I'm doing here is using the hot wire cutter to kind of build or cut out a not so much a square but like a random pattern then. But as you can see across the top, when you're cutting things with your hot wire cutter, you kind of left with these sort of straight edges, these straight lines. So what you'll see me do is I'm kind of cutting as much as I can in different areas. So I'm kind of moving the hot wire cutter around in different patterns. So I'm happy with that as the size of one of my rocks, so I'm going to cut the other one to fit. And what I mean is, as you can see, I've cut this one now to show loads of different sort of textures, effects and things like that. So what I'm going to do is use the hot wire cutter just to go across the top layer, and as you can see, this now creates more texture, more depth and more of a organic or more normal or natural looking rock. Because if you leave it as it's just flat as it is, so when you're using the hot wire cutter, you can kind of lose out on the effect that the rocks themselves are old, big, real looking rocks. And that's why, as you can see on the sides, I'm just placing the hot wire cutter gently into the sides and then leaving areas where some of the rock and some of the areas, the lines and things are just creating deep sort of creases. And again, that's just adding to the element of these rocks looking a little bit more organic, and they will stand next to each other like so. So there we go, that's cutting the rocks out to begin with. So having these 2 squares and cutting out all of these textures, all of these organic and natural looking sort of creases and folds, that's where we want to be. Now with polystyrene, polystyrene is a little bit of an awkward one. A lot of glue melts polystyrene, so you can't use a lot of glue on polystyrene. There's only certain types of glue you can use to glue things down. So I'm using PVA glue, and I'm using clear PVA at the moment. Now what you will find with PVA glue is it takes an absolute age to dry. So if you use large blobs of PVA glue, it will take at least a day to dry down to stick things to the base. Now if you don't have much patience, this can become quite difficult because you're waiting for so long for this to dry that it can kind of you get a little bit impatient. You want to go and check to see if it's dried and then move it out of position, and then you've got to wait for it to dry again. So the best thing to do is to just place your PVA glue, stand them where you want them or how you want them, and then leave them for at least a day and come back to the project a day later. Now once they dry and they're in place, what I'm going to do then is I'm moving on to using some filler. Now the cool thing with filler, or if you're in the States I think it's called spackle, is this stuff is cheap, very cheap. So I picked this tub up for something like £1.50 in the UK, which is absolutely next to nothing. And that's all I've done is I've added a little bit of water into this, and it is very messy, but it's a really cool effect. So I've added a little bit of water into this so that this moves and can be manipulated a lot quicker and a lot easier than if it wasn't. And pretty much what we're going to do is, while this is wet, you can move this across the area, across the miniature, across your build, and it will move and manipulate across the build quite quickly. And as you can see, I'm wearing a glove and I've got my cutting mat down because, as I said, this is a very messy thing to do. So you're manipulating and moving this around the model and around the miniature, around your build as much as possible. And what you want to do is wait for it to kind of half dry. And once it becomes half dry, you can dab your finger across this filler. So as the filler starts to dry down, the more you dab your finger across, you see how it's leaving those bumps and that more natural looking sort of texture. It won't dry flat if you keep dabbing, because what you're doing is, as it's kind of half dry, and as you can see, this area here is still a little bit too wet to get this effect, but as it's kind of half dry, it will dry then using, or dry into that texture and into that effect that you're using. Now, the mistake I made building this is I used a hairdryer to warm this up, to dry it down a little, and that worked fine, but ideally you kind of want it to dry down more naturally, because then you won't end up with some of the folds and creases that you've got on there. And the reason why I've done that is purely because I was trying to make a video out of this, and I was taking up half of the front room trying to build this. So of course my wife wasn't best pleased with me getting mess everywhere, so of course we had to try and get through this as quickly as we could. But yeah, as you can see, the dabbing effect will still work and it still looks great. Just, you've got to kind of catch it in this area or in this element of where it's half and half. So it's half dry and it's half wet, so that it's moldable. Now once it's completely dry, it will look something like that. And it does strengthen down and harden down as well. That adds a lot more stability and a lot more structure to your miniature, a lot more to your build as well, because not only is it glued down, it's also dried down now with this filler or spackle, which is fantastic. And what I'm doing from there is I'm using a wet or a watered down paint. For this I'm just using a blue-grey pale. I mean, you can use any grey colour that you want, because pretty much I'm going to darken this right down as I go. And I'm pretty much just going to paint the rocks in grey and then the base in brown. It's as simple as that. I'm going to make this as quick, as easy and as simple as possible, but it's going to look fantastic when it's done. It is such a simple way of making terrain, texture, scatter pieces for your games. Even if you just wanted something cool to use to photograph your miniatures, this will also work out really, really, really well for that sort of thing as well. So this is why I thought I'd make the video, just to give you guys an idea as to something that you can make that would be cool for a variety of different uses. So it's not just for your games, it's for display, or it's for photographing purposes, and all of those things. So once the grey is dry, I'm then just going to move on and use a flat earth colour, and then I'm adding a little bit of water. The good thing with using the filler as well is paint takes to this really, really well. It dries quickly on top of it, so using watered down paint, you can manipulate and move this around quite a lot. So as you can see, I'm just building up all of this brown, and I'm not too overly worried on sort of the texture of the base or the texture of how the flooring has come out, or the brown, because we're going to build over that and we're going to get sort of a great deal of foliage and overgrown sort of grass, and some of the area is going to look really, really cool. It's going to have a really cool effect, and it's going to look fantastic for all different purposes, as I said earlier. So that's all I'm doing, is painting this brown up to and around quite close to the grey area. And again, once all that is dry, I'm just going to use a dark black wash. So I'm using this Vallejo Dipping Formula black wash. This is great because it comes in a massive tub, so you can use loads of this. And I'm pretty much just going to cover the entire build in this colour. Just going to use my kitchen roll to mop up a little bit of spillage there. And yes, just covering the entire model, the entire build in this colour. This is going to tone everything down, but it's also going to tie those colours together as well. So the grey into that brown, we're not going to have such a great sort of divide between those colours as well. It's going to tie things together quite nicely. It's also great because this gets a lot of dark and a lot of black into the creases and into the areas where you kind of want the shades to be. So this is going to allow us then to dry brush and build the base and build our model back up quite quickly and quite easily. Building terrain is really, really fun as a palette cleanser. So something that you can do in between painting loads of models. It's a really fun thing to do. It's actually quite therapeutic, building a lot of terrain. It can be one of my more fun things to do, because you can literally try anything. Like with this as an example, I just thought I'd try to get two rocks standing together next to each other, because I thought it would look really cool for things like my Lord of the Rings models, my display areas and things like that. So we're going back onto using that flat earth now, and we're just going to use a really large dry brush and just going to dry brush the earth tones back up together on the base, as you can see. So I'm trying to be I'm not trying to be careful, I'm not trying to be precious of this in any way, shape or form. Literally just dry brushing this to highlight that brown colour as much as we can. And we're going to go across the whole base in this, and by dry brushing this is going to pick out and highlight and lighten the higher area, the raised parts, but leaving the deeper areas much darker. Now to make a highlight of that, I'm using the same colour, so that flat earth again, and I'm just going to use bone white in there as well. So I'm using a half and half colour with this, so that's the flat earth and the bone white together. And then again, using this highlighted colour, just going to quickly dry brush this right across the whole of the base of our model. So as you can see, the earth and the brown and the mud and all of the dirt effect is already starting to boost and starting to highlight and starting to stand out quite cool. From there, we're going to do the same thing with our rocks. So we're just going to use a blue-grey pale again, and we're just going to dry brush our rocks, and you can see just how cool and just how quickly this is going to make the rocks stand out, and how cool and quick the effect is going to really show through. Like I said, I'm not too worried about the base around the rocks, because we're going to cover that in foliage. We're going to make it look really awesome. This is more just a case of building the textures and the colours of the areas that we've painted up already. Here we go, I'll show you just across this how quickly this dry brushing effect, look at that. Such a simple technique and so quick and easy to build this texture and this colour on rocks. Just so fast that we've built this colour up already. And that's exactly what we want, because where that shade and that black wash has just sat into the darker bits, it's really creating that depth. So using a highlight grey, just using a sky grey, and again, just going to dry brush that straight across the top. And this is going to pick out on the most extreme sort of edges and the most extreme sort of areas where the light is catching on the rock, as you can see. It's a really cool effect, and a really quick and easy effect to get as well. And you can see now where those cutouts and all of the different effects that I was making on the hot wire cutters, you can see just how much those are starting to look more random and more natural, rather than just looking like I've cut out a square and then dabbed a bit on top. So we're going to use Mod Podge now. Mod Podge is one of my favourite things to use. So this is kind of like, this is a matte effect PVA glue mix. So this is a really cool, really good unit to use, really good sort of item to use, because as it dries, it will dry down to a matte effect, so you're not going to have glowing, shining areas on your model. And first things first, I'm going to use a hobby round. So that's from Gale Force 9, and this is a meadow mix. So this is green with a little element of red in there as well. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to follow some of these cracks and some of these creases, because this is kind of like a foam basing texture. By following these cracks and creases, when I place this in, this is going to make it look a little bit more like moss and foliage that has grown up the side of the rock. And again, that's adding to the natural sort of effect and texture that we're looking for. And I'm not going to do this through every crack. This is just going to try to pick out sort of random cracks. And again, by making it random, it's going to make it look a little bit more organic and a little bit more natural as well. So you'll see what I mean when we sprinkle a little bit of this across. So we're just going to sprinkle this into those cracks and into those creases like so. And there you go. You can already see that this is starting to look like moss growing up the rock, exactly as we're intending it. Just like so, just placing and sprinkling this across the areas where that Mod Podge is sitting, and then I may just dab it in just to make sure that it is sitting into those cracks as much as possible. So that's the first part. The next part, I'm going to move on and I'm going to use a Jarvis basing material. And again, this is kind of like foam, but this is a hard foam, and this breaks apart quite easily. So what I'm going to do is with my hand, I'm going to break this into very small chunks, and then I'm going to place these small chunks on the base. But what we're going to do is we're going to paint both sides of the base leading around sort of the rocks, and at the same time then we're going to leave the brown like a pathway through in between the rocks, almost as if a lot of travellers and a lot of adventurers have wandered through these sort of leaning rocks, as if this is a very legendary area in our fantasy world, and this is a legendary area where the rocks have sort of fallen and adventurers have got to cross through the path to get to a certain land in a distant area. So I'm going to cover this in quite a lot of Mod Podge, and then I'm going to drop these little areas, these little bits that we've just broken up. As you can see, I'm just dropping these again completely in random, because nature isn't uniformed. Nature is quite random, so I'm just going to place these and throw these in kind of wherever I want, you know, just going to allow them to sit into that Mod Podge. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of the Mod Podge and a lot of the glue left over, and that's exactly what we want, because then we're going to move in and we're going to use just normal grass tufts and not grass tufts, we're going to use the normal grass, static grass from World War Scenics or World War Gaming. So we're going to use this. These are just summer grass, summer static grass, and that's all I'm going to do is using my finger and thumb roll this through in a sprinkling motion, because if you roll your fingers and thumbs together, the grass then will fall again in a random pattern. So it's not going to fall flat, you're not going to have big chunks and big lumps of grass just sat there. Instead, this is going to fall down into a nice random pattern onto the base. Now, as you can see, we've got both areas done, and I'm just now that I've tapped all of the excess grass off, I'm just adding a little bit more grass just on top, just into areas where some of the glue may have seeped through onto the grass, just so that I fill all of that grassy area as much as I can. And as you can see, again, just using my finger and thumb just to roll together to create that natural pattern, and then pat off the excess once more, just like so. From there, I got this mega tub of tufts off Amazon. It was like £15, I think it was, and it comes with all these amazing, great looking grass tufts, and there's so many different random ones. There's sort of flowery ones with different colours on them. There's loads in there. So this big mega tub is brilliant for random things, and then it creates a really great set for us to be able to make this cool looking scatter terrain, because again, we're just going to stick a few of these in random areas. Now for this, I'm using super glue, and I'm just going to put a dab of super glue and then a random tuft like so. And we're going to place a few of these around, and then some grass tufts and things like that later, but I'm just going to show you me placing a few of these to begin with, and then of course, like I say, it's all random, so you can place them wherever you want, however you want, and create your own kind of cool looking fantasy bases and cool looking otherworldly kind of scatter terrain. So you can see what I mean now when I say that it is quite therapeutic just building sort of terrain, because you can see each stage just coming together really quickly, really simply. You have these awesome effects, some great looking ideas as well. You know, you're only limited by your imagination, because you can kind of make anything out of these. And the grass tufts and the flowery tufts, these really make it, you know, it's really overgrown. Like I say, you can tell it's a fantasy world, because you've got this overgrown grassy area, this leaning rock area, and then the pathway for the adventurers to walk through as well. And the cool thing is, I've made this tall enough as well that the models will be able to fit underneath, and they'll be able to walk through if you play in your games and things like that. So it creates a really cool, really unique sort of piece of scenery. Yeah, I just love doing it. I really enjoy doing it. If this is something that you'd like to see me make more of and paint more of, then just give me a shout. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Let me know what you think of the overall finished piece, because I love this thing. I think it looks really, really cool. It's also a little bit of a difference from just painting miniatures as well. But if you'd like to see me do some more scenery bits, just give me a shout in the comments below. This is something that I was inspired by from Mel, the terrain tutor. And Mel, the terrain tutor, has a fantastic YouTube channel where he builds loads and loads and loads of terrain pieces. He's a fantastic guy, a lovely bloke, and he makes some really good content. So if you haven't seen him before, please go and check him out. He makes amazing things. As always, my friends, thank you so much for your time, for your positivity, for tuning in, and I will see you on the next one.